Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about William IX's poem, I'll Make a Verse of Nothing at All. William IX was the ninth Duke of Aquitaine, or at least ninth Duke named William, Duke of Aquitaine, from the late 11th into the 12th century. He was in the Troubadour tradition, so this was singer. So he was not a professional troubadour. He was obviously a professional duke, but in the medieval period, dukes and nobles, knights, the aristocracy did appreciate and write poetry. And that was regarded as part of the chivalric tradition. William IX was in the troubadour tradition. And so troubadours were minstrels who sang ballads of love, of chivalric combat. They had these very set types of content, and it was the content that would go on to become the basis for chivalric romances, noble deeds, knights in shining armor, damsels in distress, this sort of stuff. And this was what people wrote about. And the interesting thing about I'll Make a Verse of Nothing at All is that in this poem, William is doing this meta-poetic thing that I think we tend to think of as more prominently a modernist technique. It's a poem about all of the stuff that he's not doing that's typical of poems, right? So the focus here, the majority of the verses, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 verses, at least in the translation in the Norton Anthology of World Literature. We have 7 verses. 6 of them really are about how he is not writing about love, how he's not writing about glorious combat or noble battle, how he's not writing about sort of religious devotion, these things that are very typical of poems in the poetic tradition of the troubadours. And that's the positive content of the poem, right? I am not writing about the stuff you might expect a poet to write about. That's what the poem is about. It's a poem that is about itself and about the nature of poetry, what we call meta. It is a meta poem, meta poetic being poetry about the nature of poetry or about what it means to be a poem, about poetics, whatever it is. So we get this from the first stanza, which reads like this. I'll make a verse of nothing at all. It won't be about me or about anyone else. It won't be about love or about youthful joys or about anything else. In fact, I wrote it while I was dozing on the back of my horse. So we get, again, this sort of ironic treatment of poems about glorifying the self, poems glorifying a patron or a beloved. Again, it's not about love, a major theme. It's not about youth and joy, major themes of poetry. And then the sort of irony of I wrote it while dozing on my horseback, while dozing on the back of my horse. This confronts the normal sort of idea of poetry as art and something that you experience in a burst of inspiration, or that you work and carefully craft. Neither of these things, William is saying, is what happened here. This just, I was sleepy, I wasn't really thinking about it, and the poem just came out. And so this is what we basically get in the poem, is the first 4 stanzas in particular are really focused on here's what this poem is not about. It's not about any of these things that you might expect. Then we get a kind of shift when we get into the 5th stanza. So the 5th and 6th stanza are focused on the beloved, but it's a beloved who paradoxically exists. So this is not a traditional beloved in which the speaker is like, oh, I long for this specific person. Her positive qualities outshine all other women or whatever it is. It's not this kind of thing. What it is basically like, I'm in love with this woman, but I don't know her. It's a weird paradoxical set of stanzas. So the 5th and 6th stanza, I have a lovely girl, but I don't know who she is. Because I've never seen her, I swear it's true. She never does what pleases me. She never gives me peace, and I don't care, because I never have a Norman or Frenchman in my house. He was from Aquitaine, which is in southern France, and in this time, the 11th and 12th centuries, it was not a unified French kingdom, so when he says Norman or Frenchman, he's talking about northern French as opposed to southern French, which were very different cultures at the time, and to a lesser extent are still somewhat divided. I've never seen her, and I love her with all my heart, and she never treats me right, and she never treats me wrong. I'm just as happy if I never see her again. I don't give a damn. Because I know a girl even more lovely and pretty, she's worth 10 of the other one. So again, it is this weird treatment of love, where, again, normally in poetry, you would expect the beloved to be this particular person with distinctive qualities. There are things about this woman that I love, whatever it is. I love her hair, her skin, her voice, whatever about her. Here, it's this paradoxical thing. I have a lovely girl, but I don't know who she is. Because I've never seen her, I swear it's true. The almost non-existence or quasi-existence of the beloved is this weird twist to the norm of poetry. And then, I've never seen her, and I love her with all my heart, and she never treats me right, and she never treats me wrong. I'm just as happy if I never see her again. Again, we have a lot of paradoxical stuff here. She never treats me right, she never treats me wrong. Why? What does that mean? But also this, I've never seen her, I'm just as happy if I never see her again. It's this weird construction, but it's an interesting construction that, again, challenges these sort of poetic tropes by, in this case, almost redeploying not cliches, but generic standards, things that are common in poetry, by redeploying contradictory ideas or images from poetry and jamming them together and treating them as though they're not contradictory. We sort of undermine this idea of poetry as a method of expressing emotions. But then the last stanza is the one that I really don't quite understand. And the reason I don't understand it is because it's what's called a contraclaw, according to the footnotes in the Norton Anthology here. The contraclaw that will unlock the riddling poem is a common feature of troubadour verse, especially in the poetic mode of troubadour clause, or enigmatic verse, literally closed verse. So the contraclaw is basically this idea that, like, there exists a poem or a person or some sort of cipher that can help make sense of the riddles and paradoxes and apparent nonsense of the poem itself. So the final verse says, I've made the verse, I don't know what it's about, but I'll send it to that one who will in turn send it to someone else over there out by Anjou, and maybe he'll send back to me out of his private pocket the secret clue. So the contraclaw, my sense of it is that this was a cipher is really the right word. This was some sort of extra textual clue that would help figure out the actual meaning of a poem. Like, now you can navigate this poem because you have this additional piece of information. What William does that's an interesting twist is, and maybe he'll send back to me out of his private pocket the clue. So here is a poet who does not know the secret of his own poem. He does not know. The contraclaw is for the poet as much as for the reader of the poem or the listener of the poem. And so that's, I think, an interesting twist on this tradition, because my sense is that what the contraclaw was meant to do was to set up the poet as having secret knowledge, but secret knowledge that could be gained by the reader with the right tool. Here, the poet has knowledge that is so secret that even the poet himself does not know what that knowledge is. And so again, the whole thing is built on this meta-poetic exercise of challenging the norms of poetry, confronting our expectations, and pointing to the potential limitations of poetry as a form in this time period. And again, that's something that I think we tend to really associate more with the modernist or postmodernist period, where people start really questioning not only poetry, but literary forms, artistic forms, forms of knowing, and challenging those forms in themselves.